in the year 2525, Zager and Evans here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Sharif Abdel-Qaddous. Sharif?
Well, the Yes Men aren't the only group accused of pulling off a hoax in the debate over climate change legislation. In August, the American Petroleum Institute, the oil industry's top lobbying group, was found to have asked member oil companies to help recruit employees, retirees, and contractors for anti-climate bill rallies around the country. Critics said the API was trying to fake a grassroots movement to give a false impression of widespread public opposition to tackling global warming. While as the Yes Men pulled off their hoax Monday, the American Petroleum Institute held its annual meeting in Austin, Texas. Chief executives from oil giants ExxonMobil, BP America, ConocoPhillips, and Chevron were all in attendance. The executives declined to speak to reporters, but American Petroleum Institute officials renewed their opposition to climate change legislation. API CEO Jack Gerard said the industry has, quote, a lot of education to do in convincing Americans to oppose mandatory emissions cuts.
Our next guest has just published a new book on corporate efforts to mislead the public on human-driven climate change. It's called Climate Cover-Up, the Crusade to Deny Global Warming. Jim Hoggan is president of the award-winning PR firm Hoggan & Associates. He's also chair of the Canada-based David Suzuki Foundation and the Canadian chapter of Al Gore's The Climate Project. As you listen to what the Yes Men just did, posing as Chamber of Commerce spokespeople, and the Chamber of Commerce saying they like law enforcement to look into these imposters. What are your thoughts about the corporate control of information and this whole issue of at least throwing some question into whether climate change is a real problem?
You know, one of the things I would say is that the PR stunt wasn't pulled off by the Yes Men. The PR stunt is basically being pulled off by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and it's been going on for decades. Our book, I'm a PR guy of about 30 years, and I kind of stumbled across this campaign, of what I would call a kind of confusion campaign, when I was doing some reading, and we've documented this two-decade-long campaign by industry in Canada and the United States. That's the energy industry, basically designed to confuse the public about climate change and give people the sense that there's a debate about the science of climate change. And my reason for writing this book is that I don't think that PR people and industry front groups should be determining what our policies are in Canada and the United States on solving climate change.
So outline the strategy. What was the corporate strategy to do this, and name names?
Well, the first thing was to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on everything from focus groups to very sophisticated messaging to setting up groups of pseudoscientists to confuse the public about, to create the impression that there was actually a debate where there was none. In the 2 decades ago, there was a group called the Advancement of Sound Science Coalition that was put together by Philip Morris. They were having problems, as we know, with public credibility. So they decided to invite some friends to join this fight, what became a fight against scientists. And one of the first companies they invited was ExxonMobil. And this was kind of the beginning of these front groups and this war on science that has evolved and continues today with front groups all over the United States.
And how did these lobbying groups or PR firms be so successful? Where was the media in all of this?
Good question. I don't know. That's probably a better question for you than me. I think basically overworked and undereducated on science and easy to manipulate. And when you have a lot of money, like these people do, a lot more money than climate scientists have, they are out there all the time writing news releases, doing press conferences, creating, phony studies, and all these vehicles to basically manipulate people's thinking on climate science.
And you also write about the level of sophistication that these PR firms have, that they put stories in local regional papers, avoiding larger city newspapers where journalists may have a science reporter that is more focused and may be able to pick apart the argument better. Talk about some of the strategies that Task used that you write about.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that they did was they basically started to create this impression that there was a scientific debate. There was an enormous amount of research done in this area to they do these focus groups, and they find out that your average person thinks that there's always a debate in science. So rather than kind of fighting and saying climate change isn't happening, let's just say we don't know if it's happening. There's a debate. Now, that debate actually wasn't taking place in the scientific community. It was actually taking place in the news media, in the mainstream news media. And just by repeating it, having enough money to repeat these kinds of messages over and over again, people start to become susceptible to this. The root of all this campaign, is the fact that corporations have less and less credibility as the years roll along, particularly over the past couple of decades.
But more and more money.
More and more interests to protect, but less and less credibility. So what they do is they actually hire fake groups of scientists, put together these what we call astroturf groups, to go out there and act and say things that these corporations couldn't say themselves.
Jim Hoggan, we read in headlines today that in West Virginia, activists opposed to mountaintop removal staged a sit-in in the governor's office. 7 people were arrested. You write about little coal salvaging a future that's stuck in the tar sands. People in the United States don't know as much about the tar sands in Canada that they should, since a lot of our energy is coming from there. And you also talk about how the debate cripples public policy and paralyzes private action. Go from little coal to that.
Well, let me give you an example. About a year ago, I was kind of shocked to find, reading a paper in Canada, that the Premier of Alberta, where the tar sands are, decided that they were going to spend $25 million on a public relations campaign on the tar sands. And I was shocked because, well, this is the political leader of the wealthiest province in Canada, thinking that the tar sands was a public relations problem, not an environmental problem. And I think that's where the problems start, but they get worse because of the massive amount of money. $25 million is an enormous amount of money. It just overwhelms the system. So you're able to hire the best researchers, you're able to come up with the best messages, you're able to hire the best PR firms, you can send out the most news releases, you can hire the best scientists for hire, and it's just impossible for legitimate climate scientists to have a voice in these kinds of situations.
And we just have a minute left, but you write about how reading the book may affect your faith in humanity. What gives you hope about the whole climate so-called debate and future changes to legislation?
The more we know about these kinds of groups and these kinds of efforts, the less they work. And I would just encourage journalists to ask these people whether or not they're actually practicing climate science, whether they are climate scientists, and who they're taking money from. Start to ask these questions and shed light on these people. They'll be far less effective.
We want to thank you, Jim Hoggan, for being with us. The book is called Climate Cover-Up: The Crusade to Deny Global Warming. And that does it for today's program. If you'd like to read a transcript of today's show, or if you missed any part of it and want the video or audio podcast, or want to embed it in your website, you are welcome to. Go to democracynow.org, where you can also follow us on Twitter. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Sharif Abdel-Qaddous, Aaron Mate, Angelique Comet, Steve Martinez, Nicole Salazar, Hani Massoud, Robbie Karen, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, and Peter Curries are our engineers. Democracy Now! Broadcasts on more than 800 stations, on Pacifica stations, on NPR stations, on public access TV stations, and PBS stations. We're on community and college radio stations around Canada. We've just gone on television daily in Austria, and I'm looking forward to addressing the Elevate Festival in Austria tomorrow. Democracy Now! Is your program on television, on radio, on the internet. Your radio station, your public television station deserves support, needs your support. You are the protector of public media in this country, which is why we can bring you the kinds of broadcasts that we do regularly, exposing the corporate control of information, of the media. Today, bringing you stories from the Yes Men to the young man, Sam Pollen, who was arrested outside Blue Cross Blue Shield, and hear why people are protesting in their own words. Also, special thanks to Becca Staley, Nick Gilla, Hugh Grand, Samantha Chambly, Jessel Noor, John Gerberg, John Randolph, Kellen Innocent, Kieran Krug Meadows, Rakham Penny, Vesta Godars, Rabia Alghani. Want to also thank Brandon Jordan for the footage today. And thank you also to Kai Newkirk for helping with our access to our guests today. Again, our website is democracynow.org. You can also get our headlines in Spanish for any radio station to take, as more than 200 are, and read those headlines in Spanish and in English. And if you're a teacher, write to us at stories@democracynow.org and tell us how you're using Democracy Now! In your classroom. I'm Amy Goodman with Sharif Abdel-Qaddous. Thanks so much for joining us.